There was something about that farmhouse that didn't belong to the world of the living, a silence too heavy, too laden, as if the walls themselves were breathing grief. The servants whispered about the boy who wouldn't speak, about the locked room on the second floor, and about the seamstress who was about to arrive, unknowingly stepping into a world of pain. But can a soul bearing its own scars truly heal another? Or do they merely recognize in a stranger's eyes the same void that dwells within themselves? Blackwood Estate, Fairhaven County, deep in rural Georgia. June 15th, 1978. It was here that everything was about to change. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button now and subscribe to the channel. Turning on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapters. Comment below with your thoughts. Your interaction helps this content reach more people. Now, let's continue. Eleanor Vance never imagined her life would fit inside an old leather suitcase and 2 cardboard boxes. 22 years of existence reduced to scraps of fabric, colored threads, needles of all sizes, a few simple dresses, and a faded photograph she avoided looking at but couldn't bear to throw away. The image showed a young man with a wide smile, a straw hat tilted back, strong arms that once lifted her off the ground, spinning her until the world became a joyful blur of colors. Edward, the name still hurt like a needle-piercing raw flesh. 6 months had passed since that December morning when the church bell in St. Joseph's Creek rang differently. It wasn't the joyous peal of a wedding meant to announce her union with Edward. It was the funeral knell, slow and heavy, enough to squeeze the heart of anyone who heard it. Eleanor was finishing stitching the last thread flowers onto her own wedding dress when Mrs. Higgins arrived running barefoot, her apron still dusted with cornmeal, screaming that there had been an accident during the harvest. An accident. Such a small word to carry so much horror. Edward Miller, 24 years old, foreman of the Bellevue farm, had been crushed when a logging truck overturned on a curve of the dirt road. They said it was quick, that he didn't suffer. Eleanor never believed that. She believed pain always finds time to exist, even if only in eternal seconds, where a whole life flashes before the eyes and consciousness screams for what will never be again. She packed the unfinished wedding dress into a cedar chest, locked it with a key, and swore she would never touch it again. Some things need to remain buried so that we can keep breathing. The following months were a grey fog. Eleanor sewed. It was all she knew how to do. Her mother, who passed away when she was 15, had taught her every stitch, every secret of invisible seams, of perfect hems, of firm buttonholes. Now, a widow before she had even been a wife, Eleanor accepted any order. Christening gowns, Sunday bests for the farmhands, patches on work trousers, sheets that needed darning. Her hands moved automatically, while her mind wandered to dark places where Edward was still alive, where they married, had children, and grew old together under the strong southern sun. The house where she lived was small, 2 rooms and a half at the back of Mr. Jacobs's property. He pitied her and charged a symbolic rent, a few dollars a month, an amount that barely paid for the kerosene for the lantern. Eleanor woke with the rooster's crow, sewed until her fingers ached, ate little because food was a luxury for those who had only their own labor, and slept late, praying for sleep to come quickly and for dreams not to bring Edward's smiling face as if death didn't exist. It was Mrs. Gable, the pharmacist's wife from the village, who brought the news that would change everything. It was a hot afternoon in June, the kind of humid heat that sticks to the skin and makes the air feel too heavy to breathe. Eleanor was hunched over a baby's layette, embroidering tiny daisies on unbleached cotton, when she heard the knock at the door. Mrs. Gable entered without waiting for an answer, as was customary among acquaintances, bringing with her the scent of talcum powder and cologne. The woman had news, she said with the tone of someone carrying important information. The Blackwood estate was in need of a seamstress to make a complete christening trousseau. High-end work, imported fabrics, French lace, delicate embroidery. They paid well, very well. $500 for the complete job, plus room and board for as long as necessary. Eleanor felt her heart accelerate. $500 was more money than she saw in 6 months of work. She could pay off debts she still had at the pharmacy and the general store, buy new fabrics, maybe even save something for a rainy day. But Mrs. Gable also brought warnings, and the tone of her voice changed when she pronounced them. The Blackwood estate belonged to the Varricks, an old, powerful family, owners of land that stretched for miles. Mr. Robert Varrick was a recent widower. His wife, Teresa, had died in childbirth just 4 months ago. The baby didn't survive. The couple's son, a 5-year-old boy named Peter, hadn't spoken since. He went mute from sadness, they said. The entire estate carried the weight of mourning. Even the birds seemed to sing more quietly when flying over those lands. Eleanor listened to everything in silence: grief, death, the muteness of pain. She recognized each of these words intimately, perhaps for that reason, or perhaps because she desperately needed the money. She accepted. Mrs. Gable smiled, said she would notify the estate, and that Eleanor should be ready to travel the following Monday. A truck would come to pick her up at dawn. The work would take at least 3 weeks, maybe a month. She needed to bring her sewing tools and simple clothes, nothing too fancy. A seamstress was a seamstress. She had a specific place in the hierarchy of the big house. Monday arrived wrapped in the cold mist of early morning. Eleanor barely slept the night before. She packed and unpacked her suitcase 3 times, questioning if she was taking enough thread, the correct needle sizes, if her 2 gingham dresses weren't too old, too worn. When the first ray of sun broke the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, she heard the unmistakable rumble of an engine on the dirt road and the crunch of tires on gravel. The driver was a middle-aged black man, greying hair, thick hands of someone who has worked since childhood. He introduced himself as Josiah, the foreman of the Blackwood estate. His voice was deep, deliberate, and he looked her straight in the eye when he spoke, a rare thing for someone in his position. He helped Eleanor climb into the cab of the dusty pickup truck, stowed the suitcase and boxes in the bed, and offered a wool blanket to protect her from the morning chill. Then he shifted gears, and they departed. The journey took nearly 3 hours. Eleanor watched the landscape change as they moved away from St. Joseph's Creek. Small properties gave way to immense estates, fences that never ended, pastures where cattle scattered like dark dots over endless green. Tobacco fields stretched in perfectly aligned rows, the leaves broad and green under the June sun. The smell of wet earth, manure, and curing tobacco filled the air. It was the smell of rural wealth, of land that produced golden leaves. Josiah spoke little during the ride, but when he did, his words carried weight. He told her he had worked on the estate for 20 years, since he was a boy. He knew Robert when he was still a spoiled child, the only son of a traditional family, saw him grow, marry, have a child, become a widower. Teresa's death shook everything, Josiah said, keeping his eyes on the road, hands firm on the steering wheel. It wasn't just her who died that day. Something died in every person in that house, especially in the boy. Eleanor asked about Peter. Josiah sighed deeply before answering. He said the boy used to be happy, talkative, curious. Ran through the gardens, climbed trees, asked 1,000 questions about everything. But since his mother closed her eyes never to open them again, Peter made no sound. Didn't cry, didn't laugh, didn't ask for anything. Just watched with eyes too big for a small face, eyes that seemed to have aged decades in a few weeks. The doctor said it was emotional shock, that he would speak again when he was ready. But 4 months had passed, and nothing, not a word, not a whisper. Eleanor's heart tightened hearing that. She knew that kind of silence. Hers was different, internal, but it existed all the same. It was the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say in the face of the permanent absence of a loved one. She looked at the horizon where the sun was already high and hot, and felt for the first time in months something akin to purpose. Perhaps that child needed someone who understood the weight of grief without needing words. Blackwood Estate appeared at the top of a gentle rise, and the first impact was one of intimidating grandeur. The main house was immense, built in the Greek Revival style, with white walls, tall windows protected by dark wooden shutters, and a slate roof that shimmered under the midday light. A wide veranda encircled the entire front, supported by thick columns. Well-kept gardens framed the building, full of roses, jasmine, and blooming hibiscus bushes. Surrounding it, smaller buildings housed storage barns, stables, tenant houses, and a small chapel with an iron cross on top. Josiah drove the truck around to the back of the mansion, where the service entrance was located. Here, the world was different. Fewer flowers, more pragmatism, piles of firewood, wash basins, a fenced chicken coop, a huge vegetable garden where greens grew in organized beds. A black woman in a white apron appeared at the kitchen door, wiping her hands on a cloth. She had a round face, a severe expression, and introduced herself as Bernice, the house cook for 15 years. Her tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. Eleanor understood immediately. One more mouth to feed, one more person to supervise. Bernice led her inside through the enormous kitchen, where copper pots hung from hooks, a wood-burning stove occupied half the wall, and the smell of beans cooking mixed with fresh coffee. They passed a pantry the size of the entire house Eleanor lived in, filled with sacks of flour, rice, sugar, tins of lard, glass jars of preserves. Wealth. This was wealth Eleanor only knew from hearsay. They climbed a narrow staircase reserved for the staff, and Bernice opened the door to a small but clean room on the 3rd floor, under the eaves. A single bed with a straw mattress, a trunk for clothes, a small table with a basin and pitcher of water, a wooden chair, and a window overlooking the back of the property. Simple, but infinitely better than Eleanor expected. Bernice said meals were served in the kitchen with the other staff. Breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6 in the evening. Bathing was once a week in the wash house out back, water heated on the stove, laundry on Saturdays. After settling Eleanor in, Bernice took her to meet Madame Constance Varick, the family matriarch. They crossed wide corridors decorated with antique paintings, Persian rugs and mahogany furniture that shone from polishing. Everything there breathed tradition and very old money. Madame Constance was waiting for them in the sewing room, a spacious room on the 2nd floor with windows that flooded the space with natural light. The woman was 58, but looked younger. Dark hair held in an impeccable bun, a morning dress closed up to the neck, an upright posture that never relaxed. Her eyes were intelligent and cold, assessing Eleanor from head to toe in a single glance that registered everything. Madame Constance spoke in a firm, clear voice. Eleanor had been hired to create a complete christening trousseau for the son of a distant cousin living in Atlanta. 12 pieces in total. Tiny shirts, swaddling clothes, blankets, a baptismal towel, a ceremonial gown. All in Irish linen and Swiss batiste, fabrics already ordered and arriving in days. The embroidery should be delicate but not exaggerated, following the good taste the Varick family always prized. She would have access to the sewing room from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. She was not to circulate through the house beyond what was necessary. She was not to disturb Mr. Varick or his son, Peter. The house was in mourning and required silence and respect. Eleanor nodded at every instruction. Madame Constance dismissed her with a brief wave of her hand, like one shooing a fly. Bernice led her back to her room and left her alone. Eleanor sat on the narrow bed, looked out the window showing infinite golden fields under the afternoon sun, and wondered what world she had just entered. There was something in that house that went beyond grief. It was as if the walls held ancient secrets, as if the silence was a choice and not just a consequence. The first few days at Blackwood Estate were of silent adaptation. Eleanor woke with the chapel bell ringing at 5:30, washed her face in the cold basin water, went down to the kitchen where Bernice already had hot coffee, corn biscuits, and fresh cheese on the large solid wood table. She ate quickly alongside other maids, women of few words, who examined her with curiosity but asked no questions. Then she went up to the sewing room and spent the entire day measuring, cutting, basting, sewing. The fabrics arrived on the third day. They were of a quality Eleanor had never touched before. The Irish linen was so fine it felt like a cloud between her fingers. The Swiss batiste had a soft sheen that reflected light as if it had a life of its own. The French lace pieces were works of art, too delicate to be made by human hands. Eleanor felt afraid of ruining something so expensive, but her fingers knew what to do. Muscles trained by years of practice moved with millimeter precision. It was on the fourth day that she saw Peter for the first time. She was hunched over the sewing table, basting the hem of a tiny shirt, when she felt she was being watched. She looked up and almost gasped in fright. In the partially open door of the sewing room stood a small boy, too thin, skin too pale, enormous dark brown eyes that looked like bottomless wells. He wore short black trousers, a white shirt, leather shoes, mourning clothes, clothes too heavy for such a light body. Eleanor held her breath. He just watched, motionless as a statue, small hands clutching the hem of his own shirt in an unconscious gesture. She didn't know what to do. Madame Constance had said not to bother the boy, but he was the one who had come here. So Eleanor did the only thing she knew how to do. She smiled, a small, gentle smile that demanded nothing in return. She said softly, "Good morning, Peter. It's good to see you." The boy didn't answer, didn't move. But his eyes blinked once, slowly, and Eleanor had the impression that he really saw her, not just looked, but saw. Then, as silently as he appeared, he retreated and vanished down the hall. Eleanor stood still for long seconds, her heart beating faster, feeling that something important had just happened, though she couldn't say exactly what. Peter returned the next day. Same time, mid-morning when the light came in strong through the windows. He stayed in the doorway, watching. Eleanor continued sewing, but this time she spoke to him without looking directly. She commented on the embroidery she was doing, explained that those tiny flowers were called daisies, that each petal took 12 stitches. She said that when she was a girl, her mother taught her to embroider, and that in the beginning her hands got so tired she cried. But with time her fingers learned, and now sewing was like breathing. Peter made no sound, but Eleanor noticed he had taken a step inside the room. Just one. A tiny step that signified curiosity, overcoming fear or sadness or whatever, kept him away from the world. She continued speaking softly, in a conversational tone, as if she were certain he would answer at any moment. She told him she was making clothes for a baby who was going to be baptized, that a christening was an important party, that the baby would wear that beautiful dress and be blessed in the church, that the dress would be kept afterward as a memory of a special day. When she finally looked at the door again, Peter had disappeared. But on the floor, right where he had stood, was a small red hibiscus flower. Eleanor felt her eyes sting. She picked up the flower with care, as if it were made of crystal, and placed it inside the prayer book she always carried with her. That flower was a message. A silent message from a boy who still knew how to communicate, just not with words. The following days established a pattern. Peter appeared every morning, stayed watching for a variable amount of time, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes half an hour. Eleanor always spoke to him. She didn't ask questions that required answers. She just narrated what she was doing, told small stories, hummed songs her mother used to sing. And always before leaving, Peter left something. Once it was a smooth white stone, another time a bluebird's feather, then a tobacco leaf in the shape of a perfect heart. Eleanor kept everything in an empty sewing box, as if they were treasures. And they were. Each object was proof that behind that silence existed a living child. A child who felt, who observed, who wanted connection even without knowing how to reach for it. She never told anyone about the visits. Instinctively, she knew this was a secret between her and the boy, something fragile that would break if exposed. It was in the second week that everything changed. Eleanor was embroidering the christening gown, the most important piece of the layette, when she heard a sound she never expected to hear. A sob, low, muffled, but unmistakable. She raised her eyes and saw Peter in the doorway, not watching as usual, but crying. Silent tears ran down his small face, and his entire body trembled like a leaf in the wind. Eleanor didn't think. She dropped her sewing, stood up, walked over to him, and knelt to be at his eye level. "What is it, my darling?" she asked with a voice trembling with concern. Peter didn't answer with words, but his body responded. He threw himself against her, clung to her neck with the desperate strength of someone drowning, and cried. He cried like a child who had kept months of pain inside a chest too small to carry such weight. Eleanor hugged him, pressed him against her own chest, rocked him gently while murmuring nonsense words, just sounds of comfort. "Shh, shh, it's okay. Let it out, I'm here." Her hands stroked his dark hair, ran down his thin back, feeling every sob shake that fragile little body. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. It could have been minutes or hours. The world disappeared around them. When Peter finally calmed down, he remained hugging her, his face hidden in her shoulder, his breathing still irregular. Eleanor continued holding him, singing softly a lullaby her mother used to sing, the same one she had promised never to sing again after Edward died. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird won't sing, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring." She felt the exact moment Peter relaxed completely against her. She felt when the trust was established, fragile as a spiderweb, but real, genuine. And it was in that moment that Eleanor knew, with absolute certainty coming from deep within her chest, that this boy needed her as much as she needed him. Two broken hearts recognizing each other. The door to the sewing room opened abruptly, and Madame Constance's voice cut the air like a sharp blade. "What is going on here?" Eleanor raised her eyes, still holding Peter, and saw the matriarch standing in the doorway, her face contracted in an expression between shock and fury. Behind her stood a tall man, broad shoulders, dark hair slightly greying at the temples, dressed in black from head to toe. Mr. Robert Varick. His eyes were the same colour as his son's, but where Peter's were oceans of sadness, his were hard stones, impenetrable. Eleanor should have let go of the boy. She should have stood up, apologized, explained, but something inside her refused. Instead, she squeezed Peter a little tighter and said with a firm voice, "He was crying. He needed comfort." Madame Constance took 2 steps into the room. "That is none of your business. You are here to sew, not to meddle where you haven't been called. Let go of my grandson immediately." But before Eleanor could move, before any other word was said, something extraordinary happened. Peter turned his head, looked at his father, who remained motionless in the doorway, and with a voice hoarse from disuse, with the difficulty of one who hasn't spoken in months, with an effort that made his little hands grip Eleanor's neck even tighter, he said just one word, a word that would change everything forever. "Stay." The silence that followed that single word was so deep, Eleanor could hear her own heart beating. Stay. A small word, just 4 letters, but heavy enough to make the whole world stop spinning. Peter had spoken. After 4 months of absolute muteness, after doctors gave up, after prayers without answers, the boy had pronounced a word. And it wasn't Daddy, it wasn't Grandma, it wasn't any of the words everyone expected to hear first. It was stay, a request, a plea, a choice. Robert Varick remained frozen in the doorway, eyes wide and fixed on his son, who still clung to the seamstress's neck. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. His large hands hung inert by his sides, and Eleanor saw something cross that hard face, which until then seemed carved from granite. It was pain mixed with hope, disbelief mixed with relief, all together in a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't process fast enough. Madame Constance was the one who broke the spell. "Peter," her voice came out trembling for the first time since Eleanor had met her. "My grandson, you spoke. Thank God you spoke." She took a step forward, extending her arms, but Peter shrank even more against Eleanor, hiding his face in her shoulder. The matriarch stopped, hands still extended in the air, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something break in that implacable facade. It was hurt, deep hurt of someone who had just been rejected by the child she hoped to embrace. Robert finally moved. He walked over to where Eleanor was still kneeling on the floor, with Peter in her arms. His shadow fell over both of them, and Eleanor raised her eyes to meet his. Up close, she could see those brown eyes weren't stone, as she initially thought. They were a rough ocean, full of contained storms. He looked at his son, then at her, then again at his son. His voice, when it finally came out, was hoarse, loaded with emotion he was clearly fighting to control. "Peter, son, can you look at Daddy?" The boy didn't move. Robert swallowed hard and tried again. "Please, son, just look at me. Let me see you." This time Peter turned his head slightly, enough for one eye to peek from behind Eleanor's shoulder. Father and son looked at each other for long seconds. Robert knelt, getting on the same level as them, and Eleanor saw his hands trembling before he rested them on his own knees, as if he didn't trust what they might do if left free. "You spoke," Robert whispered, and there was so much tenderness in those two words that Eleanor felt her own heart tighten. "You spoke, my little one. Daddy's been waiting to hear your voice for so long. So long." Peter continued watching but said nothing more. Robert seemed to hesitate, then asked carefully, like someone walking on thin ice, "Do you want Miss Eleanor to stay?" Peter nodded against her shoulder. Once, vigorous, unequivocal. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, there was decision there. He stood up, helped Eleanor stand as well, and for the first time she was standing before him, still holding Peter, who refused to let her go. Robert was taller than he looked from afar. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eyes. He smelled of coffee, leather, and something she couldn't identify. Perhaps just the scent of a man who spends the day riding under the strong sun. "Miss Vance." His voice was deep, firm, holding the authority of someone who has always been obeyed. "My son just asked that you stay. I don't know what you did. I don't know how you managed to reach him when all of us failed, but it is evident that a connection exists here." He looked at his mother, who remained rigid near the door. "Mother, I think it best Miss Eleanor continues at the estate even after the trousseau is finished. We can find a suitable role for her." Madame Constance turned pale. "Robert, that is absurd. She is a seamstress. She has no qualification to care for a child, no breeding to associate with our family. She has no—" Robert interrupted her with a voice that admitted no contest. "Mother, my son spoke for the first time in 4 months. I'm not going to question the miracle. I'm going to be thankful for it. If this young woman is the reason, then she stays. End of discussion." The silence that followed was dense as molasses. Madame Constance looked from her son to the non-existent granddaughter still in Eleanor's arms, then to the grandson, who now watched her with defiant eyes, and Eleanor saw defeat cross that aristocratic face. Without saying another word, the matriarch turned and left the room, her mourning skirts rustling with contained fury. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor until they disappeared. Robert ran a hand over his face, the tired gesture of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I apologize for that," he said, looking at Eleanor. "My mother is protective. She thinks she is defending the family." Eleanor didn't know how to answer, so she just nodded. Robert looked at his son again, and there was so much love in that look it hurt to witness. "Peter, don't you want to come with Daddy now? We can go see the new horses that arrived yesterday." Peter shook his head negatively, tightening his arms around Eleanor's neck. Robert sighed, but didn't insist. "All right, son, you can stay with Miss Eleanor a little longer." He looked at Eleanor again, and this time she saw gratitude there, mixed with something else she couldn't name. "Thank you," he said simply. "For whatever you did, thank you." Then he left, leaving Eleanor alone with Peter still clinging to her. She waited until she was sure they were alone, then walked to the chair near the window and sat down, settling the boy in her lap. He finally relaxed his grip a little, but didn't let go completely. Eleanor rocked him gently, humming softly, feeling the small, warm weight against her chest. Something was happening inside her, something she hadn't felt in months. She was feeling necessary, useful, alive. If you are following this story and your heart is already tight with everything that is happening, leave your like now and share it with someone who also loves emotional stories. The next chapters will move you even more. Peter fell asleep in her arms. Eleanor remained motionless, afraid to wake him, watching the small face finally relaxed in sleep. He had long lashes that cast shadows on pale cheeks, parted lips, breath soft and regular. He looked even more fragile sleeping, like a bird fallen from the nest. She didn't know how long she stayed there, but when she finally heard footsteps approaching, the sun was already lower in the sky and her legs were numb. It was Bernice entering, bringing a tray with tea and bread. The cook stopped upon seeing the scene, her eyes scanning Eleanor and the sleeping boy, and something in her expression softened. She placed the tray on the sewing table carefully so as not to make noise, then approached and whispered. "I heard he spoke." Eleanor nodded. Just one word. But he spoke. Bernice smiled, and it was a genuine smile, full of warmth. "That's a miracle, miss. A real miracle. Been a long time since we saw a miracle in this house." She looked at Peter with tenderness. "That boy's been needing a mother's comfort for a long time. His grandmother has no knack for these things, too rigid. His father is drowning in his own pain. The aunt lives here but only thinks of herself. The boy was alone in the middle of everyone." Eleanor felt curiosity awaken. "Aunt?" Bernice nodded while adjusting the shawl slipping from Eleanor's shoulder. "Miss Beatrice, sister of the late Mrs. Teresa. Lives here since she was widowed about 3 years ago. She helped her sister when the poor thing was sick. After Mrs. Teresa died, she stayed to help with the boy. Or at least that's what she said. But between you and me, I think she has other interests." Before Eleanor could ask what that meant, Bernice was already moving away. "Let him sleep as long as he needs," she said over her shoulder. "Tonight dinner can be served right here if you'll want." "And miss," the cook stopped at the door and looked back with a serious expression. "Watch out for Miss Beatrice. She isn't going to like any of this." Peter woke when the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple. He lifted his head from Eleanor's shoulder, blinked slowly, looked around as if trying to remember where he was. When his eyes met hers, he didn't get scared. He just stared, those big eyes full of something that looked like a silent question. Eleanor smiled. "Hi, sleepyhead. Did you have a good nap?" Peter didn't answer with words, but slid off her lap and walked to the sewing table. He stood observing the christening gown Eleanor had left halfway done, small fingers almost touching the delicate lace. Eleanor stood up, stretching her aching legs, and joined him. "It's pretty, isn't it? It will be even prettier when finished. Do you want to help me?" Peter's eyes went wide, and he nodded vigorously. Eleanor grabbed a scrap of simple cotton fabric and a dull point needle, the kind proper for children to learn. She sat down and pulled another chair close to her, helping Peter climb up. "I'm going to teach you a very easy stitch," she explained, while threading red thread into the needle. "It's called a running stitch. Look here." She made a few stitches in the fabric, slow and exaggerated, so he could see every movement. In from the bottom up, pull, in from the top down, pull. See? Peter watched with intense concentration. Eleanor guided his little hand, helping him hold the needle, showing how to push through the fabric without pricking his fingers. The first stitches were crooked, irregular, but Peter didn't give up. His tongue appeared between his lips with the effort of concentration, and Eleanor felt immense tenderness flood her chest. "Just like that," she encouraged. "It's looking great. You have artist's hands." They stayed like that until dark, Eleanor lighting the oil lantern. When natural light wasn't enough, Peter concentrated on his increasingly firm stitches. When Bernice brought trays with dinner, rice, beans, stewed meat and collard greens, the boy had managed to make a whole line of stitches by himself. He looked at Eleanor with an expression so proud she had to blink fast to hold back tears. "It looks beautiful, Peter. Very beautiful indeed." And they dined together right there on the sewing room floor, sitting with the trays balanced on boxes. Peter ate little, but he ate, and that was already a victory. Bernice had mentioned earlier that the boy barely touched food since his mother's death. Eleanor talked while they ate, telling silly stories about cats she had known, about the time she tried to bake a cake and forgot the sugar, about how the wind sometimes made funny noises in the roof tiles of the house where she lived before. Simple, everyday stories that didn't require an answer, but filled the silence with warmth. When it was time to sleep, Eleanor didn't know what to do. Should she take Peter back to his room? Call someone? But the boy was already drowsy again, rubbing his eyes with little hands stained with red thread. She improvised a bed with folded blankets in a corner of the sewing room near the window where the night breeze came in fresh and smelling of jasmine. Peter lay down without protesting, and she sat beside him, stroking his hair until his breathing deepened into sleep. She was about to go to her own room when she heard footsteps in the hall, heavy, masculine. The door opened slowly, and Robert appeared carrying a lantern in his hand. He looked at his son, sleeping on the floor, then at Eleanor, who was still sitting nearby. His expression was hard to decipher in the flickering light of the lantern. "He should be in his own bed," he said, but his voice held no censure. Eleanor stood up, shaking out her skirt to unwrinkle it. "I didn't know if I could take him. I don't know the house, and I thought maybe he wanted to stay here. Sorry, I should have." Robert shook his head, interrupting the apologies. "No. It's all right. If he's sleeping peacefully, that's what matters. He hasn't slept peacefully in months." Robert entered the room, placed the lantern on the table, and for the first time, Eleanor saw him up close without kneeling or holding Peter. He was tall, must have been over 6 feet, broad shoulders of someone who does physical labor despite being a landowner. His hands were calloused, she noticed when he leaned them on the table. They weren't the hands of a man who only gave orders. They were hands that lifted weight, that dealt with ropes, tools, soil. "Thank you for what you did today," he said without looking at her, eyes fixed on his son. "I don't know how to thank you properly. The doctor said he would speak again when he was ready, but I was starting to lose hope, starting to think maybe he never again." His voice failed. He cleared his throat, composing himself. "You achieved in days what no one achieved in months." Eleanor didn't know what to say. She felt unprepared for that conversation, to be alone with that man in a dark room while everyone slept. "I only did what anyone would do, Mr. Varick. I gave him attention, talked, listened without expecting an answer. I think sometimes that's what people need, someone who doesn't demand anything in return." Robert finally looked at her, and Eleanor saw deep weariness in those eyes. "You can call me Robert," he said, "at least when we are like this, just us. Mr. Varick was my father, and he died 10 years ago. I'm just Robert." He seemed to realize how intimate that sounded, and added quickly, "You will be staying here indefinitely now. All this formality makes no sense." Eleanor nodded, though something inside her alerted to a danger she couldn't name. Robert walked to where Peter slept, knelt, and with infinite care ran his hand through his son's hair. His face transformed in that moment. The hard lines softened, eyes filled with love so pure, Eleanor had to look away, feeling she was invading a moment too private. "He looks so much like his mother," Robert said softly, more to himself than to Eleanor. "Same eyes, same mouth. Teresa would be—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Teresa would be happy to see him well. To see him happy." There was something in his voice, something that wasn't just the pain of loss. It was guilt. Heavy guilt he carried on his back like an invisible burden. Eleanor dared to ask, was she a good mother? Robert remained silent for so long Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark night outside. "She was," he said finally, "maybe the only good thing in our marriage. She loved Peter more than she loved her own life. She died trying to give him a little brother." The words hung suspended in the air, loaded with meaning Eleanor didn't completely understand. There were layers there, untold stories, kept secrets. Robert turned to her again. "You lost someone too. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I see it in your eyes. That look of someone carrying grief inside the chest." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "Yes," she admitted. "My fiancé. Accident 6 months ago. We were going to get married." Robert nodded slowly, as if that explained something. "That's why you understand. That's why you manage to reach where no one reaches. Because you know the pain. You don't try to rush it, don't try to fix it. Just stay there, letting the person exist the way they can." They stood there, stopped on opposite sides of the room, united by an invisible thread of mutual understanding. Two people shattered by loss, trying to piece together the shards as best they could. Eleanor felt something change in that moment, a door opening, a possibility arising. She pushed the thought away quickly. She couldn't think like that. He was the employer, she was the employee. He was the master of the estate, she was the seamstress. He was a rich widower, she was a poor dead man's bride. The world didn't work in a way that allowed bridges between those distances. Robert picked up the lantern. "You'd better rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. My mother will want to speak with you. Define your duties now that you're staying. And Beatrice, too, my sister-in-law. She'll want to meet you." There was a warning in his voice, though Eleanor didn't understand why. "I'll take Peter to his bed. Thank you again. For everything." He bent down, picked up his son with ease, and Peter didn't even wake, just snuggled his head into his father's broad shoulder. Robert left, the lanterns swinging and making shadows dance on the walls, and Eleanor was left alone in the darkness. She walked to the window, looked at the infinite stars shining over the estate lands, and asked herself what she was getting into. The following days established a new routine. Eleanor still worked on the trousseau during the mornings, but now Peter stayed with her all the time. He didn't talk much, just loose words here and there, always in unexpected moments. "Hungry." "Pretty." "Thank you." Each word was celebrated like treasure by the whole house. The maids smiled when they passed him. Josiah gave a proud pat on his head. Even Bernice, who rarely showed affection, squeezed his cheeks and called him a blessing. But not everyone was happy. Madame Constance maintained an icy distance. She passed Eleanor in the corridors without a word, face closed in a mask of disapproval. Eleanor tried to be respectful, always greeting, lowering her eyes, but the matriarch treated her as if she were invisible, or worse, as if she were a threat that needed constant monitoring. And then there was Beatrice. Eleanor met her on the third day after the incident. She was in the garden with Peter, sitting under the shade of a massive weeping willow, when a woman appeared on the stone path. She was beautiful in a conventional way, brown hair held in an elaborate braid, a mourning dress that accentuated a thin waist, pale skin protected from the sun. She had uncommon blue eyes, heritage of some European ancestor, and used this distinctive trait as a weapon, knowing exactly the impact she caused. "So you are the famous Eleanor," she said without introducing herself, stopping a few steps away. The voice was too sweet, artificial like sugar dissolved in poison. "The girl who achieved the impossible, made my nephew speak." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Must feel very special." Eleanor stood up, instinctively placing herself between Beatrice and Peter. "I am just the seamstress, ma'am. I am here to work." Beatrice laughed, a crystalline and fake sound. "Seamstress? How interesting, because from what I heard, you are much closer to the family than a seamstress would normally be. Sleeping in the main quarters. Dining with my nephew, even calling my brother-in-law by his first name, they say." Eleanor's cheeks burned. "I didn't—" Beatrice raised a hand, interrupting. "No need to explain. I understand perfectly. You saw an opportunity and grabbed it. Poor girl, no family, no future, suddenly surrounded by wealth. Who wouldn't try to improve their life?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone. "Just advice from woman to woman. Don't delude yourself. Robert is vulnerable right now. My sister died only 4 months ago. When the pain passes, he will see things clearly, and he will realize you are just a servant." Eleanor felt anger boil inside her, but before she could answer, Peter emerged from behind her, grabbed her hand, and said with a clear voice, "Eleanor stays, not you." Beatrice went pale. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The boy stared at her with an expression that mixed defiance and pure rejection. Beatrice tried to compose herself, forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Peter, dear, Aunt Bea only wants what's best for you. You know that." But Peter turned his back to her, pulled Eleanor by the hand, and walked back to the willow tree. Beatrice stood still on the path, humiliation coloring her cheeks red. When she looked at Eleanor again, all pretense had disappeared. What remained was pure hatred. "You will regret this," she said with a low, dangerous voice. "I promise." Then she turned and left, skirts rustling with fury. Eleanor sat down again under the tree, heart beating fast, hands trembling slightly. Peter climbed into her lap, nestling against her, and whispered something that froze her blood. She didn't like Mommy either. Eleanor looked at the small face raised to hers. "What did you say?" Peter repeated, louder this time. "Aunt Bea didn't like Mommy. They fought a lot. Mommy cried." Eleanor hugged the boy, but her mind was racing. What kind of family was this? What secrets did those walls guard? And more importantly, what danger had she just placed herself in? Weeks passed, and the trousseau was finished. 12 pieces of perfection in linen and lace, every stitch executed with mastery that even Madame Constance had to acknowledge with a dry nod. But Eleanor didn't leave. Robert installed her officially as Peter's governess and tutor. She got a better room, on the 2nd floor near the family quarters, a generous salary of $100 a month, and clothes suitable for the new position. Peter flourished under her care. He returned to speaking regularly, although he was still a quiet and thoughtful child, smiled more, played in the gardens, learned more sewing stitches, and now embroidered his own initials on handkerchiefs. At night, Eleanor read him stories from books in the estate's enormous library, and he fell asleep safe, without the nightmares that used to torment him. and Robert. Robert was always nearby. Not in an obvious way, but Eleanor noticed. He appeared in the gardens when they were there, checking heaven knows what on the rose bushes, showed up in the library when she was choosing books for Peter, offering suggestions. Dined with them in the smaller dining room, something apparently he never did before, always eating alone in the study. They talked, about small things at first, the weather, the harvest, farm stories, then about bigger things. Childhood, lost dreams, fears they kept. Eleanor perceived the change in him, the hard lines of his face relaxing, the eyes less shadowy. Even the staff commented that the boss was different, more present, more human. And she, God help her, began to feel something she shouldn't. Her heart raced when she heard his footsteps in the halls. Her face heated up when their eyes met. Her nights became populated by dreams where Edward faded and another face took his place. It was on a warm September afternoon that everything changed again. Eleanor was in Peter's room, organizing his clothes, when she found a wooden box hidden beneath the bed. She shouldn't have opened it. She knew that. But curiosity was stronger. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in delicate feminine penmanship, the paper lightly scented with lavender. Letters from Teresa. Eleanor picked one at random, her hands trembling as she began to read. They were letters Teresa had written but never sent. Letters of venting, of pain, of deep loneliness within a loveless marriage. She wrote about Robert with respect but without passion. About Madame Constance, who controlled and criticized her. About Beatrice, who envied and sabotaged her. About Peter, who was her only joy in a world that suffocated her. In one of the letters, dated 2 months before her death, Teresa wrote that she knew Beatrice was in love with Robert, that she saw the looks, the insinuations, that Beatrice was waiting for Teresa to die or for the marriage to end so she could finally have what she always wanted. The letter ended with a devastating confession. Sometimes I think it would be better for everyone if I simply disappeared. Robert would be happier. Peter would have a mother who truly smiles, and I would finally rest from this exhaustion of existing where I am not loved. Eleanor was crying when Robert entered the room. He stopped when he saw her, the letters scattered on her lap, and went pale. "Where did you find this?" His voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. Eleanor couldn't speak, only pointed to the box. Robert walked slowly, as if in a trance, picked up one of the letters, read it, and his face twisted in agony. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to God, I didn't know she felt this way. She never said, never complained. I thought we were okay. Not happy, perhaps, but okay. Surviving. Raising our son. I didn't know she was so unhappy." He sat on the floor, the letter still in his hand, and Eleanor saw tears stream down the face of that strong man. She moved without thinking, knelt beside him, took his hand. "It wasn't your fault," she said with a conviction that came from a deep place. "Arranged marriages are like this. No one is to blame when love doesn't exist. You both did the best you could." Robert looked at her, eyes red, face destroyed. But she died thinking no one loved her, died alone in her own pain, and I was so blind, so focused on work and responsibilities that I didn't even see. I am guilty, yes. Guilty of negligence, of cowardice. Eleanor squeezed his hand between hers. "You can forgive yourself," she said softly. "Teresa would want you to forgive yourself. She would want you to be happy." Robert closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, there was something different there. It was decision. It was courage. It was something Eleanor recognized too late. He raised his free hand, touched her face with infinite delicacy, and whispered, "You make me feel alive again. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how, but I can't pretend anymore that it's just gratitude, that it's just because of Peter. It's more. It's you, your voice, your smile, the way you make this house seem less dark. I know it's wrong. I know it's too soon. I know all the reasons why I shouldn't. But Eleanor, She placed her fingers over his lips, silencing him. Her own heart was beating so fast it felt like it would explode. Me too, she confessed, and saying it aloud she felt guilt and relief at the same time. Since Edward, I thought I would never feel anything again. But you made me want to live again. Made me want to wake up in the morning. Made me... He didn't let her finish. He leaned in and kissed her. Gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if asking permission with every second. Then deeper, more desperate, months of loneliness and pain pouring into that kiss. Eleanor reciprocated, forgetting where she was, who she was, all the social rules that said this was impossible. In that moment, there were only the two of them, two broken hearts finding comfort in each other. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. Robert rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "This is going to be complicated," he whispered. "My mother is going to lose her mind. Beatrice will... God knows what Beatrice will do. The whole county will talk. You will suffer." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I've already suffered. I survived. I'll survive again. The question is, are you willing?" Robert opened his eyes, and what she saw there was a promise. "For you and for my son, I'll face anything, anyone, the whole world if necessary." They kissed again, sealing a promise both knew would be tested. And it was. Because at that exact moment, standing in the partially open doorway of the room, witnessing everything, was Beatrice. Her face was a mask of fury and triumph at the same time. She smiled, slow and venomous, then retreated silently and disappeared. The war was just beginning. The storm didn't come all at once. It came in waves, small at first, almost imperceptible, like when the tide starts to rise and you only realize you're in danger when the water reaches your neck. Beatrice waited. A patient, calculating woman, she knew revenge served in haste loses its flavor. So she waited 3 full days before making her move. 3 days during which she watched Eleanor and Robert try to hide what now existed between them. The glances that lasted a second too long, the hands that almost touched when no one was looking, the small, secret smiles that two people in love cannot completely contain. On the morning of the 4th day, Beatrice found Madame Constance in the sunroom, where the matriarch took her Earl Grey tea while reviewing the estate ledgers. The light filtered through the stained glass painted the older woman's face in shades of green and gold, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. Beatrice entered with measured steps, her face composed in an expression of suitably dramatic concern. "We need to talk about something very serious," she said, closing the door behind her. "Something that will change everything in this house." Madame Constance raised her eyes, the porcelain cup suspended halfway to her lips. "If it is about that seamstress, I already know Robert is making a fool of himself," she said, her voice cutting like a knife. "I am not blind. I see how he looks at her, but it is a phase. Grief makes a man seek comfort in the wrong places. It will pass." Beatrice shook her head slowly, sitting in the chair opposite her mother-in-law. "It isn't just that. It is much worse. I saw them, in Peter's room, 3 days ago. Kissing." She paused calculatedly, letting the information sink in. "As lovers, Constance. Not as employer and employee who respect each other. As lovers." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to suck the air out of the room. Madame Constance placed the cup on the saucer with excessive care, the kind of care of someone trying to control a fury about to explode. Her hands, always steady, trembled slightly. "Are you certain of what you are saying, Beatrice? Because to accuse without proof is slander, and I do not tolerate lies in this house." Beatrice knew this moment was crucial. "I'm absolutely certain." I was going to take extra blankets to Peter's room when I heard voices. I hid and saw everything, Robert declaring himself to her, saying she makes him feel alive, and she reciprocating, saying she feels something too. Madame Constance stood up, her posture always erect, now rigid as steel. That woman, that two-bit seamstress, thinks she can simply waltz into my family. Seduce my son when his wife's body has barely turned cold in the ground? Her voice rose in volume with every word. She came here as a servant. We gave her a roof, food, a generous wage. And this is how she repays us, trying to marry the master, climbing the social ladder by stepping on Teresa's grave? Beatrice stood up too, placing a hand on her mother-in-law's arm in a gesture of solidarity. I know it is painful. My sister is barely gone, and there is already another occupying her place. It is disrespect to her memory. It is humiliation for our family. People will talk. They will say Robert is weak, that he let an opportunist manipulate him, that our name, built over generations, is being tarnished by a woman of no breeding who saw an opportunity and grabbed it. Madame Constance walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where, in the distance, Eleanor and Peter could be seen playing near the fountain. The sight only intensified her rage. She has even dominated my grandson, turned the boy's head against his own grandmother. Peter barely looks at me since this intruder arrived. Preferred her to me. Me, who cared for him since he was born. Beatrice approached, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone. We need to act. We cannot let Robert make this mistake. He is blind right now, vulnerable. But if we can open his eyes, show him who this woman really is. The matriarch turned, and her eyes held a dangerous glint. What do you have in mind? Beatrice smiled, small and triumphant. I have a plan, but it will require us to be creative. Madame Constance didn't hesitate. Do whatever is necessary. Just get that woman out of my house and out of my son's life, before it is too late. That night, while Eleanor slept in her room on the second floor, dreaming of a future that finally seemed possible after so long swimming in darkness, Beatrice was in Robert's study. Not stealing exactly, because the drawer wasn't locked. Just borrowing sheets of the letterhead stationery he used for official correspondence, and also one of the special pens he used, the one with dark blue ink that had a unique shade, impossible to forge perfectly, but she would try. Beatrice spent hours that night practicing. She had one of the letters Teresa had written, the one Eleanor had dropped when Robert kissed her. Beatrice had picked it up from the floor afterward, kept it as a trophy, and now used it as a model. She practiced her dead sister's handwriting, letter by letter, until her imitation was good enough to pass unnoticed in a quick reading. Then she composed the most venomous letter she could create. Robert, she wrote in Teresa's hand. I discovered something disturbing about that seamstress, Eleanor. I investigated her past and found out that the fiancé who died, it was no accident. She was in debt, and he had life insurance. People in St. Joseph's Creek talk. They say she knew the truck had bad brakes, that she encouraged Edward to make that trip even though he hesitated. I'm afraid for you and for Peter. A woman capable of that is capable of anything. Please, investigate before trusting her near our family. Teresa, it was a lie, a perverse and complete lie. But Beatrice knew a lie works best when it contains elements of truth. Eleanor really was in debt. Edward really did die in a logging truck accident. Mixing these real facts with a false insinuation of guilt would create enough doubt. And doubt, well planted, grows like a weed until it chokes out anything good. Beatrice placed the letter in an envelope, sealed it with red wax using the family seal that sat on Robert's desk, and hid it inside the last book in the library, that treatise on tobacco cultivation no one had opened in years. Then she went to sleep, satisfied with the work done. The letter would be discovered at the right time, at the perfect moment to cause maximum damage. Meanwhile, Oblivious to the conspiracy weaving around her, Eleanor lived days that seemed like a dream. She and Robert hadn't made their relationship public, but he had begun to court her in discreet ways that made her heart melt. Wildflowers left at her door every morning, poetry books marked on specific pages with verses of love, notes hidden among fabrics in the sewing room, saying simple but profound things. "You brought light back to this house. Thank you for existing. I didn't know it was possible to start over until I met you." Peter noticed and approved in the unequivocal way of a child. He began calling Eleanor godmother, a word he had chosen himself and which meant more than a substitute mother. It meant choice. He drew the three of them together on his papers, Robert tall and strong, Eleanor in a long skirt and loose hair, himself small between them holding their hands. When Robert saw the drawings, his eyes got misty, and he hugged his son with a strength that spoke of love and gratitude and hope. It was on a rainy afternoon in October, when the sky poured water as if wanting to wash the entire world, that Eleanor finally allowed herself to believe happiness could be hers again. She was in the library, looking for a book of fairy tales to read to Peter before bed, when Robert entered. He was wet from the rain, hair plastered to his forehead, soaked shirt clinging to the muscles of his chest and arms. He looked like he had been running. "Eleanor," he said, breathing still irregular, "we need to talk. About us, about the future. I can't stand hiding anymore. I can't stand pretending you are just the governess, that what I feel is just gratitude." He walked to her, took her hands, and Eleanor felt something important was about to happen. "I know it's soon. I know people will judge, but I don't care. I don't care about anything other than you and my son. And he loves you. You gave my son back to me. You gave me back to myself." Eleanor felt tears wanting to escape. "Robert, He placed a finger on her lips, the same gesture she had made weeks before. "Let me finish. Because if I don't say it now, I'll lose my courage." He took a deep breath. "Marry me. Not in months or years. Marry me soon. In the estate chapel, with the priest who baptized Peter. It doesn't need to be big, doesn't need a party. It just needs to be us, you, me, Peter, and God as a witness. The rest of the world can say what they want." Eleanor's heart stopped. Marriage! He was asking for her hand. A wealthy, respected, powerful landowner was kneeling before her, a poor orphan seamstress, asking her to marry him. It was impossible. It was scandalous. It was everything she secretly desired, but didn't dare admit even to herself. "Robert, your family will never accept it. Your mother hates me. Beatrice wants to see me far away from here. The whole society will—" "Damn them all," Robert said with a vehemence that frightened her and at the same time made her feel protected. "I spent my whole life doing what was expected. I married who my mother chose. I managed the estate the way my father commanded. I followed all the rules, fulfilled all the obligations, and I almost lost my son in the process. I almost lost myself. Now I am going to do what my heart commands. I am going to choose love. I am going to choose life. I am going to choose you." Eleanor fell to her knees with him, tears now running free, and said the only word that mattered. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. Yes to everything." They kissed right there on the library floor, surrounded by old books that held love stories from past centuries, creating their own story that would be told by future generations. But happiness, Eleanor would soon learn, is a delicate flower that wilts quickly when poison is poured on its roots. Because 2 days after that proposal, when Robert decided it was time to officially announce the engagement, Madame Constance requested an urgent family meeting. Everyone had to be present. Robert, Beatrice, and yes, Eleanor too. Because the subject concerned her directly. They gathered in the main parlour, the one reserved for formal occasions, with carved wooden furniture, red velvet curtains, portraits of ancestors looking down severely from the walls. Robert entered with Eleanor by his side, his hand firm on her back in a gesture of support. Madame Constance was seated in the main armchair, the posture of a queen about to judge a traitorous subject. Beatrice was standing near the window, her face carefully neutral, but Eleanor saw triumph shining in her blue eyes. "Mother," Robert began before anyone could speak, "Eleanor and I have something to announce. We are going to get married. I know it is fast. I know it is not conventional, but my decision is made. I hope you can give us your blessing, but with or without it, the wedding will happen." Madame Constance showed no surprise. She just looked at her son with an expression that mixed pity and disappointment. "Sit down, Robert. You too, Miss Vance. You will want to be seated for what I have to say." There was something in her tone, something that triggered an alarm in Eleanor's mind. Robert seemed to feel it too, because he hesitated before leading her to the sofa. They sat side by side, and Robert kept Eleanor's hand firmly in his. "What is this, Mother? I already said my decision won't change." Madame Constance opened a mahogany box on the table beside her and took out a sealed envelope. "I found this yesterday, while tidying Teresa's things. It was hidden among her books in the library. It is a letter. For you. She wrote it but never had the courage to deliver it, perhaps because the content is delicate." She extended the envelope to Robert. "I think it best you read it." Robert took the envelope with a confused expression. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. Robert broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and began to read. Eleanor watched his face, seeing confusion give way to shock, shock give way to doubt, doubt give way to something that looked like suspense. When he finished, his hands were trembling, and he didn't look at her. "Robert?" Eleanor touched his arm. "What does the letter say?" He still didn't answer, so she tried to take the paper from his hands, but Robert pulled back. His voice, when it finally came out, was hollow, distant. "It's from Teresa. She says that she investigated your past, that she discovered things about your fiancé's death, that she was afraid of you, that you might be dangerous." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What? That is... Robert, that is madness. Edward died in an accident. I had nothing to do with it. I loved him. I was going to marry him. How can she—" Her voice failed when she saw the expression on his face. It was doubt. He was doubting. After everything, after all the conversations, all the kisses, all the promises, a fake letter was enough to plant doubt. Madame Constance intervened with a voice that simulated maternal concern. "No one is accusing you of anything, dear, but you need to understand our position. Teresa made these serious allegations. If there is any chance they are true, we need to investigate. For Peter's sake, for the sake of this family." Beatrice added, voice sweet with fake sympathy, "Perhaps it is a misunderstanding, but until we clarify, wouldn't it be prudent to postpone the wedding, just until we are certain?" Eleanor felt the world crumble around her for the second time in her life. The first was when Edward died. This was worse because she had allowed herself to believe again. She had opened her heart again, and now she was being accused of murder. "Robert," she looked at him, begging him to believe. "You know me. You spent weeks with me. You saw who I am. Saw how I treat your son. Do you really think I am capable of killing someone for money?" Robert finally looked at her, and what Eleanor saw broke her heart. It wasn't certainty of her innocence. It was confusion. It was fear. It was a man who had just lost a wife and was terrified at the possibility of putting his son in danger again. "I don't know," he said so low she barely heard. "I want to believe you. But Teresa had no reason to lie. She was dead when she wrote this," he thought. "People don't lie in posthumous letters. What if—" Eleanor didn't let him finish. She stood up, the dignity she learned from her mother keeping her upright, even when everything inside her screamed to curl up and cry. If you have doubts, if a letter is enough to destroy what we built, then there is nothing more to say. I am leaving. Today, I won't stay where I am not trusted. Her voice broke on the last word, but she refused to cry in front of those women who hated her. Robert stood up too. Eleanor, wait. You don't need to go. We can just... She interrupted him, and for the first time there was anger in her voice. Just what, Robert? Investigate me like a criminal, watch me like a suspect, live in this house knowing everyone looks at me like a murderer? No. I have self-respect, I have dignity, and I won't stay where I am not wanted. She left the room before anyone could answer, climbed the stairs almost running, entered her room and locked the door. Only then did she allow the tears to come. Great sobs that shook her whole body, hands clutching her chest as if she could hold her broken heart in place. She had been so foolish, so naive. She thought she could cross class barriers, that love would be enough. But the world didn't work like that. It never would. Eleanor packed her suitcase with trembling hands, throwing clothes in without care, not even seeing what she grabbed. She just wanted to get out of there, leave before more humiliation was poured on her head. She was closing the last latch when she heard a knock at the door. "Eleanor!" It was Bernice's voice. "Open up, child. I need to speak with you." Eleanor opened it, and the cook entered quickly, closing the door behind her. "You can't leave like this," Bernice said with urgency. "Not without fighting. That letter is a lie, I know it is. Mrs. Teresa would never write something like that. I knew that girl. She was kind, she wasn't malicious. Someone forged this." Eleanor wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Even if it is fake, Robert believed it. He doubted me. That is all I need to know." Bernice took Eleanor's hands, squeezing tight. "He is scared. He is confused. But deep down, he knows who you are. Give him time to think. Stay at least one more night. For Peter, the boy will be devastated if you vanish without saying goodbye." Eleanor closed her eyes. Peter. God, she hadn't even thought of the boy. How could she leave without explaining? But how could she explain to a 5-year-old child that adults are fools who destroy good things out of pride and fear? "All right," she agreed finally. "I will stay until tomorrow. I will say goodbye to Peter in the morning and then I will leave." Bernice nodded, relieved. "I will have Josiah prepare the truck to take you wherever you want to go. And child," her voice became serious, pray that the truth comes to light, because I know in my heart you are innocent, and I know those 2 vipers plotted something." That night Eleanor barely slept. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the farm, the wind in the trees, the crickets singing, some nocturnal animal calling in the distance. Sounds that had become familiar and now would have to become memories. She thought of Edward, his face already blurred by time, and asked for silent forgiveness for replacing him so quickly in her heart. She thought of Robert, of their kiss in the library, of the promises that lasted only days. She thought of Peter and began to cry again, because that child didn't deserve to be abandoned twice. It must have been almost midnight when she heard it. A low, muffled sound coming from the corridor. Someone crying. No, not crying, calling. It was a child's voice, weak, scared. "Godmother! Godmother! Help!" Eleanor jumped out of bed, opened the door, and saw Peter in the hallway, in his nightshirt, barefoot, his face red and wet with tears. He threw himself against her. "I feel sick. I'm so hot." Eleanor touched his forehead and felt panic grip her chest. The boy was burning up, high fever, very high. "Peter, my God, you're burning." She picked him up, and he was dead weight, his whole body limp with weakness. "How long have you been like this?" Peter murmured something unintelligible, his head lolling on her shoulder. Eleanor ran down the hall screaming, "Bernice! Josiah! Someone! Robert! I need help here!" Doors opened. Sleepy servants appeared. Robert emerged from his room, hair disheveled, wearing only trousers. When he saw his son in Eleanor's arms, he went white. "What happened?" "Peter has a very high fever," Eleanor said quickly, all previous anger forgotten in the face of emergency. "He came to my room asking for help. We need a doctor. Now." Robert didn't hesitate. He took his son from her arms and ran down the stairs. "Josiah," he shouted, "get the fastest horse. No, take the truck. Go get Dr. Mitchell now. Doesn't matter the time. Tell him it's urgent." Josiah ran out. Robert took Peter to the living room, laid him on the sofa, ran to get wet cloths. Eleanor was beside him, helping, removing the boy's sweaty nightshirt, wiping his small body with a cold cloth, trying to lower the temperature. Peter was delirious, muttering nonsense words, sometimes screaming that he was afraid, sometimes calling for his dead mother. Madame Constance came down the stairs in a dressing gown, her hair loose for the first time since Eleanor met her, making her look older and more human. "What is happening to my grandson?" Her voice for the first time held real fear, not arrogance. Robert didn't even look at her. "He has a fever. I sent for the doctor." Beatrice appeared too, and upon seeing the scene, something crossed her face. It was guilt. Eleanor saw it clearly. Guilt mixed with horror. But there was no time to process that. Dr. Mitchell arrived half an hour later. That felt like 3 hours. He was a middle-aged man, balding, round spectacles, leather bag always at hand. He examined Peter while everyone watched in tense silence, touched the boy's forehead, checked his pulse, looked at his throat, listened to his chest with a stethoscope. Finally, he turned to Robert. "It is rheumatic fever. It starts like this, sudden high fever. It could have been triggered by an infection he had that no one noticed, or by severe emotional shock. Children are vulnerable to that." "Emotional shock?" Robert repeated, confused. "What kind of shock?" The doctor cleaned his glasses with a cloth. Something that disturbed him deeply, abrupt change in routine, loss of someone important, intense fear. These things affect the body, Robert. Even more so in a child who has already gone through the trauma of losing his mother. Eleanor felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. She was leaving in the morning. Did Peter know? Had he heard the arguments? Was his body reacting to the imminence of losing another person he loved? Robert seemed to be thinking the same thing because he looked at Eleanor with a devastated expression. "Will he be okay?" he asked the doctor. Dr. Mitchell sighed. "If we treat it properly, yes, but he will need constant care, medicine every hour, cold compresses. Someone by his side all the time to ensure the fever doesn't rise further. If it rises much more, there could be convulsions. There could be permanent damage. I will leave instructions and medicine, but someone needs to be responsible for him." "I'll stay," Eleanor said immediately without thinking. "I will take care of him." Madame Constance began to protest. "I don't know if it is appropriate that—" Robert cut her off with a voice that admitted no discussion. "She stays. The doctor just said Peter might have fallen ill from emotional shock. Eleanor was leaving tomorrow because of the ridiculous accusation you made. His body is reacting. So she stays, she cares for him, and we resolve this mess once and for all." He looked at Beatrice. "And you, dear sister-in-law, you look quite pale, quite guilty, I would say. Do you know anything about this letter that appeared so conveniently?" Beatrice opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Madame Constance looked from one to the other, and Eleanor saw the exact moment the matriarch understood. She turned slowly to her daughter-in-law. "Beatrice, you wouldn't be capable of—" But Beatrice's expression gave everything away. The red face, the tears starting to form, the trembling hands. I just wanted to protect Robert. Protect this family. She is not of our class. She was going to ruin everything." Her voice got louder and louder, hysterical. "Teresa is dead. Robert was free. It was supposed to be my chance. I waited so long. I always loved you, Robert. Since before you married my sister, it was supposed to be me. Not her, never her. The silence that followed this confession was absolute. Even delirious Peter seemed to go quiet for a moment. Robert looked at Beatrice with an expression of pure repulsion. You forged the letter, put words in dead Teresa's mouth, accused Eleanor of murder, all because you wanted to manipulate me? Beatrice tried to approach him. Robert, please, try to understand. Get out of my house, Robert said, with a voice so cold even Eleanor felt the chill. Take your things and get off my property by dawn. I don't want you near my son ever again. I don't want you breathing the same air as us. You are... Madame Constance placed a hand on her son's arm. Robert, she is family. She is Teresa's sister. We cannot simply... Robert turned to his mother and his eyes were flames. You knew. Maybe not that the letter was fake, but you wanted to believe. You wanted any excuse to get Eleanor out of here because you cannot accept your son choosing his own happiness. You two almost destroyed everything, almost made me lose the only woman who made me feel alive in years. And because of you, because of this cruel farce, my son is sick. He could have permanent damage. If something happens to Peter, I will never forgive. Never. Madame Constance recoiled as if she had been slapped. Robert didn't wait for an answer. He turned to Eleanor, took her hands, and there were tears streaming down his face. Forgive me for doubting, for believing that lie even for a second. You are the best thing that happened to me and to my son. And I almost lost you out of pride, out of fear, out of weakness. Forgive me, please. Eleanor looked at that strong man kneeling before her, broken and vulnerable, and felt all anger melt away. She touched his face, lifted his chin so their eyes met. I already forgave. Since the moment I saw Peter sick, nothing matters except making him better. We will care for him together, and afterward we will rebuild what they tried to destroy. Stronger. Robert kissed the palms of her hands, and it was a kiss of gratitude, adoration, renewed promise. The following days were a nightmare and a miracle at the same time. Peter fought the fever, his temperature rising and falling on a roller coaster that left everyone exhausted and terrified. Eleanor didn't leave his side. She slept in a chair next to his bed, changed compresses every hour, forced spoonfuls of bitter medicine down his throat when he resisted, sang lullabies when he cried in pain. Robert was always present, helping, holding his son during the worst crises, praying softly when he thought no one was listening. If this story is touching your heart, if you want to know how it all ends, hit the notification bell now and share this with someone you love. You won't want to miss the ending. Bernice brought food that no one ate. Josiah kept vigil at the door, ready to fetch the doctor at the slightest sign of worsening. The other maids prayed the rosary in the kitchen. Even Madame Constance, kept at a distance by her son, was seen in the chapel at night, kneeling before the altar, begging forgiveness and healing for her grandson. Beatrice had left at dawn after the revelation, taken in the truck by Josiah to the nearest train station, never seen on those lands again. It was on the 5th night that the fever finally broke. Eleanor was dozing in the chair, exhausted beyond words. When she felt something touch her hand, she opened her eyes and saw Peter awake, looking at her. His eyes were clear for the first time in days, not glazed with fever, but bright with consciousness. "Godmother," he whispered with a voice hoarse from disuse, "you stayed." Eleanor began to cry, tears of relief so intense it hurt. "I stayed, my darling. I will never leave you, I promise." Peter smiled, small but genuine. "Good, because I need you. Daddy needs you too. He cries when he thinks no one is looking." Robert, who had entered the room at that moment bringing fresh water, stopped in the doorway upon hearing that. His eyes met Eleanor's, and there was no shame there. Only truth. He did cry. They cried together, for fear of losing that child, for almost having lost each other. Peter recovered slowly but completely. It took 3 weeks until he was strong enough to leave bed. 2 more until he returned to playing in the gardens. During all this time, Eleanor didn't leave the estate, not because anyone asked, but because she didn't want to. That was her place now. That was her family, imperfect, complicated, but hers. Robert kept his promise. 1 month after Peter had fully improved, they married. It wasn't the grand ceremony the Varick family usually held. It was intimate, in the small estate chapel, with Father Henry officiating. Peter was the ring-bearer, carrying the rings on a satin pillow he himself had helped embroider. Bernice and Josiah were witnesses. Some staff watched from the pews. Madame Constance did not attend, but she had sent a gift. It was a gold cameo that had belonged to Robert's grandmother, a family heirloom, and it came with a note of only 1 line. Welcome. It was a start. Reconciliation would take time, but it was a start. Eleanor wore a simple, unbleached cotton dress she had sewn herself. No lace, no luxuries. She didn't need them. She was radiant with true happiness, and that was worth more than any adornment. When Robert saw her walking down the narrow aisle of the chapel, his eyes filled up, and he didn't try to hide it. When they exchanged vows, their voices trembled with emotion. When the priest said they could kiss, the kiss was soft, reverent, a promise sealed before God and men. The life that followed was no fairy tale. Madame Constance took almost a year to speak directly to Eleanor, and when she finally did, it was only to ask advice on which fabric to use for new curtains in the parlour. But it was a start. Local society was scandalized, of course. A seamstress married to a wealthy estate owner? It was unthinkable, but Robert didn't care, and Eleanor learned to lift her chin and face the whispers. Eventually, when they saw the marriage was solid, that Peter flourished, that the estate prospered, the comments diminished. Some families even began to greet them at Sunday service. Eleanor transformed the estate in ways no one expected. She convinced Robert to build a small school on the land for the tenants' children. She herself taught sewing to the girls, giving them a skill they could use to make a living. She organized a harvest festival, where landowners and workers mixed without artificial class barriers. She opened the doors of the big house for meetings of local women, where they discussed not just embroidery, but rights, education, health. Peter grew strong and happy. He gained 2 siblings in the following years, Julia and Michael, who adored their older brother and the mother who told the best bedtime stories. He never forgot Teresa, his first mother, but he learned that the heart has infinite space, that loving Eleanor didn't diminish the love for the mother he lost, that family isn't just blood, it is choice. 20 years later, when Peter graduated as a lawyer in the capital and returned home bringing a fiancé, he gathered everyone in the living room. Eleanor was graying now. Some wrinkles marked the corners of her eyes, but she was beautiful in the way only a happy woman can be. Robert had more white hair, a few extra pounds, but his eyes still shone when he looked at his wife. The children, not so much children anymore, Julia 16 and Michael 14, sat on the rug. Peter took the hand of his fiancée, Claire, a girl with a sweet smile and intelligent eyes. I want you to know the story of how Mum and Dad met, because it is a story that needs to be told. A story of how true love breaks barriers, how a child can see what adults are too blind to see, how family is built not by blood, but by choice. He looked at Eleanor with love, so deep she felt tears prickle. I chose her first. I pointed and said, I want her to be my mother. And it changed everything for the better. Eleanor stood up, walked to her son, who was now taller than her, and hugged him. You saved me as much as I saved you, she whispered. Gave me a reason to live again. Gave me a family. Gave me a home. Robert joined the hug, and soon Julia and Michael too, creating a tight circle of bodies and love. Through the window, the sun was setting over the golden tobacco fields, painting everything orange and pink, promising a new day. Madame Constance, now 78 years old and much softer, watched from the doorway. She had never apologized with words, but her actions over the years spoke for her. She taught Eleanor to manage the estate accounts, included her in important decisions, defended her when other society ladies tried to exclude her, and now, looking at that family she almost destroyed out of pride, she said softly to no one in particular, "Teresa would be proud. She would love to know her son chose so well, that he found true love twice, and in a way perhaps Teresa knew. Perhaps she was watching from wherever good souls go, smiling to see her son happy, her ex-husband transformed into a better man, the house that was a prison for her now overflowing with true love. Deaths are not just endings. Sometimes they are also beginnings, opening the way for new stories to bloom where before there was only pain. At Blackwood Estate, on that night of celebration and memories, while stars began to dot the darkened sky and the smell of tobacco blossoms invaded the air, a family gathered. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. Built on the courage of a boy who dared to choose with his heart, on the strength of a woman who refused to accept less than she deserved, on the transformation of a man who learned that true love doesn't ask permission of surnames or social conventions. And if you ask the elders of the region, those who lived in that time and remember the stories, they will tell you in a low voice, with a smile on their lips, about the seamstress who became the lady of the manor, about the boy who healed by being healed, about the love that broke all the rules and even so, or perhaps exactly for that reason, lasted forever. They will tell you that sometimes happy endings are real, that sometimes, just sometimes, choosing with the heart is the wisest decision anyone can make. And in the small estate chapel, where two broken hearts swore eternal love decades ago, there is still a wooden pew with carved initials, E+R+P, Eleanor, Robert and Peter, chosen family, true family. A family that proved that love, the true and deep kind, really can change everything.